Hello, and welcome to this edition of HAL Hacks. I'm Cheyenne Meadows, and I'm the High Ability Learning Specialist at the Nebraska Department of Education. Today, we're going to talk about complexity, how to add a variable and examine the relationship to engage critical thinking in high ability learners. First, we need to discuss what is differentiation. Just because an assignment is different does not mean that it's differentiated. Sometimes we tend to give students that are high ability and who get through their work fast more work. And that is not necessarily differentiated, especially if it's not more challenging. It's just more volume. So when we're thinking about determining differentiation for an assignment for high ability learners, we need to think at this point in time and ask ourselves these questions. At this time, could all students do this? If all students can do what you have given the high ability learner as their differentiated product, it's probably not actually differentiated. Should all students be able to do this? If all students should be able to do the work that you are giving your high ability student, it is also probably not differentiated. And the important thing in that statement is, should all students be able to do this at this time? Maybe eventually all students should be able to do the work that you're giving the high ability learner, but maybe that's not for a couple of weeks down the road, and you need to pace faster for that student. So think about, should all students be able to do this right now if I gave it to them? And finally, would all students want to do this? Sometimes we think about high ability learner activities as something that's maybe more fun, and that maybe isn't necessarily the case. Those students need a challenge and they want something that's harder, and that can be discouraging to other students. So maybe not all students would want that challenge. So, and we know some of our high ability students may not want it either, but we know for sure that high ability students who can and who will rise to the challenge, not all students will do that. So those are the important questions to think about, not just giving them something different, but something that is truly differentiated. We're going to talk about, there are 4 domains of differentiation outlined by Carol Ann Tomlinson. They are content. So how will they access information and what are they learning? So maybe that's increasing the text level, working in small groups together, maybe that are on the same level, providing extensions for them to what they're reading or to what they're doing. Process is, how are they going to reach mastery of that concept? What activities are we going to give them in order for them to reach that mastery? So maybe those are tiered activities. So your high ability students may get one prompt and general ed gets another prompt. That applies to learning centers, and maybe pacing. Maybe the high ability students are moving faster through the curriculum than the other students. Product is that culminating piece at the end. So maybe we give them a couple choices of something that they can do instead of the final product that everyone else is doing, because they need to show their mastery of the differentiated tasks that we have been giving them. And finally, learning environment is how the classroom works and feels. And so this is something we can modify. Are there places for collaboration? Are there guidelines and routines? Is it flexible for pacing and meeting students' needs? So those are the different domains of differentiation, again, by Carol Ann Tomlinson. But today we're going to talk about, how do we use those to add complexity to assignments? So there are 3 ways to add complexity: add a variable and examine the relationship, add a concept, or add a law or theory. But today we're just going to be focusing on this, adding a variable and examining the relationship to create those higher level questions. I know that I've gone over this strategy before, but I'm a really strong believer in it, and it is such an easy pick up and use with already existing prompts. So I'm going to go over it again, and that's the that and strategy. And this is taking 2 elements and putting them together to engage students in critical thinking. So for example, in ELA, if we think about the prompt for everyone being create a new ending to the story, maybe our high ability students, we ask them to create a new ending that includes symbolism and develops the theme of individuality. And that adds that extra layer of complexity. Create a timeline. That's pretty standard in a social studies classroom. And we know that high ability students don't need that regurgitation and how to do those kinds of simpler tasks. So I'll have them create a timeline that includes 3 cause and effects relationships and how they cause a shift in power over time. Add that abstract thinking to that. Same for creating a model of the heart. Have them show its function and how that impacts other body systems. Again, taking that thinking and bumping it up another level. Adding a variable can be really simple and can fit perfectly with the lessons you've already written. So I'm going to give you a science example. If in class you're learning about sound and vibration, and your standard is students will be able to explain that sound is created through vibration of molecules. While students are exploring this concept, maybe we have our students who kind of already understand this work together, and we deepen their thinking with some of these other investigative questions, such as what happens if sound were underwater, in space, cold versus warm. So then they have to make those connections because we know sound vibrates molecules. We know molecules move faster when they're in warm temperature. What is that going to do to the sound? We know there's no molecules in space. Does that mean there's no sound in space? And so grappling with some of those higher level questions that they're ready for, and then their product can be right to generalizations about sound. And what's really difficult about generalizations is that they must be true in all situations. So that level of abstract thinking based on their investigation makes this a really complex task. And it's something that you already have written and it fits into the standard. Now I'm going to give an elementary math example. So if you're working on volume, which we know is length times width times height of a prism, and that's how you find the volume. Maybe for your high ability students who are ready for something more, we give them this irregular shaped object. And that adds a level of complexity because they have to figure out how do I find this to create the volume of this, and how do I add these two together to create the volume of this prism. And so this is a lot more complex, but still using that concept of volume. So this is just another example of how to take what you're already working on and add a variable to make it more complex for those students. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. My email is cheyenne.meadows@nebraska.gov, and I look forward to seeing you at the next HAL hack. Thank you.